Hi everyone, this is Carmel. I'm here continuing our book review on Millionaire Next Door. We are in chapter 4 and the chapter is called You Aren't What You Drive. Now, in this chapter, the focus is on the concept of the PAWs, or the prodigious accumulators of wealth that we've spoken of before in chapter 3, versus the UAWs, the underaccumulators of wealth. And it basically focuses on the idea should not be to look wealthy, to simply look the part of being wealthy, that you actually want to be wealthy. And it highlights that principle through talking about car ownership. So how people in this country, in the United States, tends to purchase vehicles. And so with that in mind, you've got the PAWs versus the mindset and how they purchase vehicles versus the UAW mindset and how they purchase vehicles. The first thing that they highlight is the stats that 2 out of 3 Americans purchase out of the two out of 3 people that purchase luxury foreign vehicles here in the United States, that 2 out of 3 of them are basically not millionaires. So you only have 1/3 of the people who actually purchase luxury foreign vehicles. You only have 1/3 of them who are actually millionaires. 2/3 of them are not millionaires, and you would expect that to be flipped. Why is it that people who are not wealthy are buying these very expensive cars? And so that's what they're talking about, that you've got a lot of people in this country who are focused on looking the part of being wealthy, but they're not focused on actually being the part of wealthy. And so with that in mind, that's one of the problems that they're talking about. The second thing that they speak on is when buying a car, that people who are PAWs, they tend to do things a little bit differently, and the millionaires tend to do things differently than your UAWs and your non-millionaires. What they tend to do is that first of all, they're shopping around and they're doing their research. They are doing extensive research. And this goes back into the principle that we talked about in the last chapter, chapter 3, about time, energy, and money. You want to use your energy and your time wisely when building wealth. So when it comes back to buying a car, I'm not just going to walk out into a lot and just go buy a Mercedes-Benz, or any Mercedes-Benz just because I have the money or I think I have the income to support that. I want to make sure that I'm getting a good deal for this Mercedes-Benz. I want to make sure that I'm not overpaying for this Mercedes-Benz. I want to make sure that if I have to take out a car note for it, that I'm getting the proper or fair interest rate and a very decent interest rate in paying this car off, etc. And so with this in mind, I'm going to do my research. I want to see if the car qualifies for any sort of tax credits or benefits. So this is what you've got your PAWs. They're doing this research. Meanwhile, you've got the average UAW who is not. They only come into the mindset, hey, I know I want a Mercedes-Benz. I'm willing to go ahead and spend whatever it is I think I can afford for the Mercedes-Benz. And therefore, that's it. If I think I can afford, $700 a month, then I'm going to go ahead and spend $700. Who cares if I'm overpaying for this Mercedes? It's a Mercedes. Who cares if I could have got it cheaper from X, Y, and Z? It's a Mercedes. They're not doing the research. So this is one of the problems. And also what this book also teaches us about the PAWs and the millionaire mindset is that millionaires and PAWs, they will haggle, they will negotiate, they know their worth. And so with that in mind, they don't just see something and just say, okay, I'm just going to take it as is. No, they haggle. They know that hey, it's business. This is how business operates. If they want my money, they'll come and meet me at my price, if they truly want to sell. And then if not, they'll move on. They're comfortable with moving on. It's no emotions for them. It's all a numbers game and a financial game for them, because for them, building wealth is extremely serious. Whereas when you're talking about your UAWs, no, it's very emotional. I want that Mercedes Benz. I gotta look a certain way. I can see this person on my arm with this Mercedes Benz. I can see what my friends and family is gonna say. And so what eventually happens is then they're turning around and they're just buying the cars regardless. And this is also one of the reasons why many people, for example, when it comes to buying a car, unfortunately, they get taken advantage of. They get a car note with a 12%, interest rate. Meanwhile, interest rates are down to 1% and 2% for cars. Just giving examples. They're turning around and spending, $600, $700 a month for a car that's a Toyota. Toyota's a fantastic car. So don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking a Toyota, but at that price, you could have gotten a Mercedes Benz for that, or something of that nature. And so people got to do their research. Not just look at what you can afford. And that's one of the reasons why dealers, when you go into a shop, that's the first thing that they'll ask you. What can you afford? Not what are you willing to pay? What can you afford? Or they'll ask you what you're willing to pay. And so with that in mind, this is why you have to do your research. Well, another reason why gap insurance is becoming so prevalent, because people are not doing their research when they're walking in. And so they're overpaying for these cars. And then when something happens to the car, or they sell the car or trade in the car, they don't have the value to sustain what they paid for the car. And therefore, they need that little bit to get them over. Doing the research, millionaires are doing that. And the impact that it has on wealth is significant because, as we talked about in the last chapter, that money that you're spending unnecessarily could have been used towards building real wealth. Cars are not an asset. Despite what anybody thinks, they're not an asset. Yes, you can sell them and make money, but the problem is that you're never going to make more from them from what you sell. From what you purchased them from. The only exception is maybe your antique cars that your collector, find them cheap, you fix them up, you turn around and you sell them to collectors for a profit. Only exception, cars always depreciate. It doesn't matter how great it is. The second somebody drives it, they depreciate. So that's one thing that they focused on. Also, that it spoke of the importance, once again, of being frugal. They gave the example of the cotton picker husband who turned around and they purchased the car and haggled and did their research. And even with the fact that the dealer gave them a price, they came back with a check that was $1,000 less than what the dealer said for it. And they said, okay, you can take it or not. And eventually they walked away with the car. And when the dealer explained to them how somebody else bought another car for X amount of dollars, which was very expensive in their eyes, the husband was like, man, do you know how much cotton you got to pick just to pay that off? It was like a $700 a month car note. And so with that in mind, yes, this goes back into the hours for dollars that we spoke about the last chapter. People who are serious about building wealth, their mindset is totally on how can I make my money work for me. I don't want the pleasure of just saying I have this car. All right. So now this chapter once again talks about the concept of defending your dollars. And this chapter, to be honest, it's getting a little bit repetitive because a lot of these principles were highlighted in the first few chapters of the book already. It's just now focusing from the mindset of car ownership, which I'll tell you why in a second. I think that still is important. But when it comes back to defending the dollar, they speak about how that's extremely important in doing. You have to basically make sure that, they do that through spending less, than they have to, that they're very frugal. That people look at cheap as being a bad thing, but no, that's a fantastic thing because it means that you're saving money. You never want to spend more than what you have to. They're finding legal ways to keep more of their money through taxes. So that's extremely important. And so a lot of cars don't do that. The example that they give is through a case study where they talked about a new car, they talked about several case studies actually. And what they talked about was, for example, if you're a business owner and you decide that you want to go ahead and buy a new car, why that's at least a little bit more advantageous than a regular person who, unfortunately, most regular people in the United States tend to be employees. Why it's least advantageous to go ahead and buy a new car, even if you're a high income employee. Why? Because as a business owner, once again, we talked about this, you have the tax benefits that you can quite possibly have. You can depreciation that can come about. The fact that you can write off expenses first, and then whatever's left over gets taxed. But as a regular person, you don't have those advantages. So in essence, whatever you get taxed first and heavily, you get taxed the most actually through earned income, which is money that you make from your normal day-to-day job. And then whatever's left over is what you get to spend. Then secondly, you don't even get to write off anything that can be used. No benefit of depreciation that can come about from this. And so it's kind of like, okay, you really don't have the benefits. Another important thing that they talk about is that, and they spoke about this from car ownership, but truthfully, it could be for any sort of business when you're a business owner. That a lot of times when you have clients, if you know that there's a need and you know that there's some place you can refer them to, you can refer them to that business, whether it's a car dealership or any other sort of businesses that you deal with. You like their service, you think they're awesome people, quality, and the prices are right, feel free to refer a client. But the beauty of that is that because of the fact that you send clients to another business's way, a lot of times you can also seek, you now have grounds to ask that business for to become a client of yours, because it's a two-way street. You help them, they can help you. And you refer them, they can come to you. And even if you can't wind up getting them as a client for many reasons why you possibly can't get them as a client, then you can still ask them to refer you because of the fact that you've sent a lot of people their way as well. And once again, we're not talking about anything grimy or shiesty or shady. We're talking about just regular, the same way. You refer people because you like them, you see the quality of their work, you think the prices are great, etc. Customer service is on point, no problem sending a referral your way. And the same way that of yourself as well. So these are the benefits that you have and how you can turn buying that car, even if it's a new car, into a win-win for you as a business owner. But most people do not have that luxury. And so this is what we're talking about. The prodigious accumulators of wealth are always thinking about these opportunities, whereas your under accumulators of wealth unfortunately, they're not. They're not planning on building wealth. They're just focused, once again, as this title refers to, on looking the part. Okay? And now the biggest thing I want to just stress to you once again, is about why I think this chapter focused on talking about car ownership, as considering that the themes are starting to become very repetitive in the chapter, is in the book, is because of the fact that when you really look at it, people are spending an unbelievable amount of their income on cars these days. I remember my first car that I purchased in 2003 or 2004. It was a Honda Accord, a 2000 Honda Accord. And it wasn't a new car, of course, but it was a certified pre-owned car. And I did it myself. I didn't tell my parents at the time. I was relatively young, and I was so proud, new teacher. And, I went, before I purchased a car, I did extensive research. So I was a PAW or PAW in the making. I did extensive research on the car. And I looked up the prices. I saw the KBB values. I saw how much you could get it for at a dealership versus private individuals. I did everything. I saw the ins and outs of the cars, the advantages, the disadvantages, and I looked into other similar cars of that nature. And in the end, after doing my research, I said, I'm settling for this Honda. But I remember before I did the research, I went into this dealership that was going to give me a 1999 Honda Accord. And, the car was beautiful. It was an EX version, had leather, seats, just all the stuff in there. And so the next thing after that, I was like, okay. And then I remember when the gentleman said, when they ran my credit, he said, okay, I'm going to give you 12%, I want to say, interest rate. It was 12 or 16%. I can't even remember. And I was like, okay, because, at that moment, I didn't think I had great credit and I didn't even understand interest rates. But eventually, I wound up leaving when he told me how much my payment was going to be. I said, okay, let me go think on it. So at least I had that going for myself. So once I knew at least I got approved, that's what encouraged me to do a little bit more research. And then eventually, when I did that, then I found out going through the credit union, through my research, going through the credit union, because they usually give you better rates. And then that's when I found out from my credit union, I had great credit. I didn't even have bad credit. Like I thought that I was saying I had great credit. And then I wound up getting approved for a 2.9% interest rate. So they were going to go ahead and rob me. That was highway robbery. Now I felt pissed. So that's why I didn't even go back to that dealership when I wanted to go get the car. And so the next thing I wound up going somewhere else. And then now that's when I found out I wound up getting a newer car. And what was different was that the Hondas, I guess they had the 4-year cycles. So now I would have paid more for that older cycle car, that the cars, the styles and everything was totally different now in the 2000 year cycle. And then I wound up getting a 2.9 interest rate from my credit union. So now when I went in, and I did my research, etc., when I went into another dealership, this time more knowledgeable, and next thing I told them how I got basically approved from the credit union with a 2.9 interest rate. What can y'all do for me? They said, okay, we'll give you 1.9%. So I was like, deal, And so eventually I felt proud and I walked out with my car. And so, and not only that, I walked out with it. I saw the average price, these cars were going for was about 18.5. I wound up walking around away with my car for 16.5 at the time. So I believe I did good and for myself. And so why do I bring this up? I remember when I first started driving, most of the cars, at least at that time, I remember feeling so proud about my car. And looking on the road and comparing, unfortunately, to other cars on the road. And I was like, my car was newer. And I just, felt proud because, you feel like a young adult. You just, doing things or whatever. And so I was like, my car was newer. And then slowly but surely, most of the cars were older cars. Like you talking about jalopy cars. You could tell that people were walking around with notes, car notes and things of that nature. But over the years, almost suddenly, most of the cars on the road wind up becoming new cars. And these are the kind of cars that basically have notes attached to it. So now when you look at on the roads today, you barely find a jalopy driving down the road. It's people are driving around with brand new cars or really, really new cars. And unfortunately, that means car notes. And why do I say that? If you got people going in even for a pre-owned car and they're not doing the research like I did the first time, or what almost happened to me the first time, then what eventually is happening, then the cars can actually be a very big detriment to building your wealth in this country. When you're being slapped with these expensive interest rates, which are happening all the time. I see it. I know of individuals who are getting cars with 16 and 25% interest rates. How do you get a car with that much rate? Like that's just criminal, No. And then people not understanding, doing their research even on themselves, like I almost did with not knowing my credit score and things of that nature, even though that luckily happened to me to find it out, but at least through doing my research for knowing to go to the credit union. So people have to do their research. And then, like I said, you've got people now needing gap insurance now because they're overpaying. All they're looking at is saying, well, I can afford this car. Okay, some people may think there's not a big deal between 18,000 and 16.5 or whatever. But no, in the end, if I bought the car for, let's say, 20,000, okay, maybe that may still be an okay price that you can afford. But in the end, if the car is only worth 16,000, that means you're $4,000 under the bridge, underwater. And so eventually that's a poor financial decision. If something were to happen to that car and you're stuck with the note, you wind up now owing the bank back $4,000. Insurance is only going to cover that. And then now people are having to pay extra insurance called the gap insurance just to cover the fact that they're making poor financial decisions. So you're spending more money because you're not taking the time to do your research and you're making a poor financial decision. So this is not to talk down on anybody. That is never my goal. My goal is simply to educate, because I think car ownership is where we're making our biggest mistakes today, financial mistakes today. And another thing, I hate to say this, but with leasing, maybe I'm not at the point where I fully understand it, the mindset of leasing yet, but I just don't like the principle, because in the end, you're always owing somebody money. Yes, you can get a more car for your buck, but in the end, it's not really your car. So I don't like to have anything where somebody dictates what I can and cannot do with something that's supposedly mine. You got people having leased vehicles and they still got to turn around and rent cars when they take a vacation because they can't put a certain amount of miles on it. Or what happens when you bring back that car in a condition that's less than desirable. I'm quite sure there's consequences, financial consequences to that. So there's so many different reasons. And then you're always paying back. Let's say you want to upgrade a car every 2-3 years. When are you going to stop paying a car note? I love not having to pay car notes, and I mean, your insurance goes down. You don't have to pay anybody back every month, and you get the freedom to do whatever you want with your car. Who doesn't want that? So the average millionaire keeps their cars for 10 to 12 years, if not more. So with that in mind, this is why I think leasing is a very poor financial choice. A lot of people do it because they think they can simply afford it. But what this book is teaching you, you can't just make decisions simply just because you can afford it. This is what the UAWs do. The accumulators of wealth do. They're having these high incomes and they turn around, they just spend because they can. But eventually when a financial crisis happens, they don't have two nickels to rub together. When it's time for them to retire, they can't afford to retire. When they want to go ahead and do something, unlike the PAWs, a lot of times they don't go to work because they want to go to work, because they find joy in going to work. They do because they have to pay for all of that consumption that they did. So this is the problem I want to focus on that chapter. The last thing I want to leave you off with that I find very interesting in this chapter is that it makes the argument that even though they focus a lot on business owners, because that's how a lot of the people became wealthy in this country, the fact of the matter is you do not need to be a business owner or an entrepreneur in order to become wealthy, to become a millionaire. That in fact, that this goes back to, once again, the planning and the budgeting and the defending of the dollars that we spoke about the last chapter, that you want to make sure that they said a lot of people just don't have that entrepreneurial spirit. And that is understandable. I wish a lot more people did, but it's understandable because it can be risky. It's, a lot is pretty much on you, and not everybody has that in them. It takes a lot of work. You don't believe those overnight success stories and people sitting outside of a Lamborghini or walking into this vacant property, whatever, that looks like a mansion. No, it takes a lot of work. And it takes a lot of time and years, and your income may be inconsistent for years on end. And I mean, lawsuits that come out. I mean, all sorts of risks that some people may or may not want to be in. So why do I say this? The point is you can still become a millionaire. And that's what the book focuses on. Why? By budgeting, planning, and defending the dollar. So you're not a business owner. Nothing stopping you from having a Roth IRA and investing, maxing out your contributions each and every year and investing that money in stocks or real estate or whatever else of that nature. Nothing is stopping you from, flipping properties and owning investment properties. Nothing is stopping you from turning around and, writing a book and collecting royalties from that, or hey, even starting a YouTube channel and, collecting money from the money from that. So with that in mind, this is what I'm trying to tell you. It's all about the mindset. You have to find ways not just to make the money, but find ways that once you make that money, take each dollar and ask yourself, how can I make that dollar become two? Before you spend anything, how can you make that dollar that you brought in become two? And once you can find ways to do that, then you can turn around and truthfully become a millionaire. So this is all that I have to say for chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave your questions, comments, concerns, complaints at the bottom, and I'd love to, debate and discuss with you. And as always, I look forward to seeing you next time.